All right, let's get right into it. We are going way, way back in time today to talk about one of the oldest stories ever written, the Babylonian creation epic known as the Enuma Elish. And this is more than just a creation myth. It's a foundational story that tells us not only how the world was made, but how power itself was seized, both in the heavens and right here on Earth.
Long before the book of Genesis was even a thought, this story was painting a picture of creation that was born from pure violence. It's an absolutely epic tale. You've got gods at war, a mother goddess who turns into a raging monster, and a young upstart hero who has to build a new world from the wreckage. So you can forget everything you think you know about a peaceful, let there be light. This is so much messier.
Just listen to these opening lines. They really transport you to the very beginning, don't they? Picture it, a universe with no sky, no land, nothing, just a swirling, chaotic mess of water. This is where it all kicks off.
So, the big question is, how do you get from a quiet, watery nothingness to an all-out divine war? Well, like a lot of family drama, it all starts with a pretty simple noise complaint.
And you've got to understand, this chaos isn't just emptiness. It's a state of pure, untapped potential. The first act of creation wasn't making something from scratch. Nope. It was the act of separation, of giving shape and form to what was completely formless.
And this first great separation gives us our first two characters. You've got Apsu, the god of the sweet fresh water, and then you have Tiamat, the goddess of the salty, bitter sea. They are, for all intents and purposes, the original cosmic parents. And when they mingle, they give birth to the entire next generation of gods.
And here it is. This is where the trouble starts. It's a classic generational conflict, right? The younger gods are just full of life, making a racket, and it's driving their father, Apsu, absolutely crazy. He can't sleep, he can't work. They're just way too loud.
So Apsu's solution is, well, it's a little extreme. He decides he's just going to kill all of them. But Tiamat, the mother, she overhears this and is horrified. She runs to her children to warn them, and her wisest son, the god Ea, decides he's not going to wait around. He launches a preemptive strike, puts his own father into a magical deep sleep, kills him, and then, get this, builds his home right on top of his father's corpse. Talk about a brutal start to the family tree.
And that one act, that patricide, it just lights the fuse for a full-scale war. Tiamat's grief quickly twists and transforms into a universe-shattering rage.
So Tiamat, the very same mother who tried to protect her children, is now completely consumed by fury. The protective mom is gone. In her place is the story's great villain, and she makes a vow to destroy every single god she ever brought into this world. And to wage this war, she doesn't just raise an army, she creates one, a legion of pure chaos. She literally gives birth to 11 horrifying monsters. We're talking hydras, giant dragons, scorpion men, and then she just unleashes them on her own family.
The threat is so immense that even the most powerful of the younger gods are just terrified. Ea, the one who started all this by killing Apsu, he tries to face her, and he fails. He runs. Then Anu, the god of the heavens, he gives it a shot, and he retreats too. The old guard is completely powerless. It's clear they need a new hero.
The established gods have failed. This creates a massive power vacuum, the perfect stage for a totally new kind of god to rise up and take command. And that's when Marduk steps onto the scene. He's Ea's son, and he was basically born a superhero. He has 4 eyes to see everything, 4 ears to hear everything, and when he speaks, fire shoots from his lips. This guy he's built different. He represents a new, dynamic, and frankly terrifying force in the cosmos.
Marduk sees his opportunity, and he's not just a fighter, he's a politician. He goes to the other terrified gods and says, look, I'll take care of Tiamat, but it's going to cost you. And what's his price? If he wins, they have to grant him supreme authority over everyone. He wants to be the one who decides the fates, the undisputed king of all gods.
And what can they do? They agree. So Marduk prepares for battle. But he doesn't just grab a sword. Oh no. He arms himself with the fundamental forces of the universe. He's got a bow, lightning, a net designed to literally trap chaos, and the 7 great winds as his personal attack force.
The battle is incredibly swift and absolutely brutal. Marduk drives the winds down Tiamat's open mouth, inflating her body. Then he lets fly a single arrow. It pierces her belly, rips her apart from the inside, and just like that, it's over. He extinguishes her life and stands victorious on top of the corpse of primordial chaos.
Now this is the very heart of the myth. Creation isn't some peaceful act. It's about building order directly from destruction. Marduk literally creates the world from the body of his slain enemy. He splits Tiamat's corpse in two, like a dried fish, as the text says. One half he lifts up to become the heavens, the other half he lays down to form the earth. And her eyes, they become the source of the two great rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates.
It's a wild story, absolutely incredible. But that's only the first layer. To really truly understand the Enuma Elish, you have to peel back the myth and look at the political machine that's humming away just underneath the surface.
And that brings us to the key question. Of all the gods they could have chosen, why was Marduk, a pretty new deity from one specific city, why was he the ultimate hero, the king of the entire universe? What was the hidden agenda here? The answer, it turns out, is that the Enuma Elish is one of the most successful pieces of political propaganda in human history. It was written for one reason: to explain, to justify, and to make holy the rise of a single city to imperial power. That city, of course, was Babylon, whose patron god was none other than Marduk himself. The way they did this was through a very clever theological rewrite. See, before Babylon was the big boss, the chief god of Mesopotamia was Enlil, from the old city of Nippur. The Babylonian priests and scribes, they essentially performed a divine find and replace. They just erased Enlil from the creation story and handed all of his traditional cosmic achievements, like separating the sky and the earth, directly over to their god, Marduk. It was a theological coup designed for political gain. And this justification of power also tapped into a really deep visual language, using one powerful symbol to define what it even meant to be divine: the horn.
Back in ancient Mesopotamia, the ultimate symbol for strength, for vitality, for divinity was the horn. It was represented by this one simple cuneiform sign.
And the logic is pretty clear. The awesome, raw physical power of an animal, like a bull, was just undeniable. So their most defining feature, their horns, became the visual shorthand for the power of the gods themselves. So why you almost always see the gods depicted wearing these elaborate horned crowns.
And, inevitably, human rulers wanted in on that divine power. So they just took the symbol for themselves. On this incredible victory monument, the king Naram-Sin is wearing the horned crown, a really audacious statement, basically claiming a status that was once reserved only for the gods.
Now, the legacy of this story is just enormous. Centuries later, when the book of Genesis was written, you can clearly see echoes of the Enuma Elish. The idea of a formless, watery chaos at the very beginning, the act of creation being a separation of waters to create the heavens, these parallels show you just how incredibly influential this one Babylonian epic truly was.
So, in the end, the Enuma Elish shows us that myths are never just simple stories. They are powerful tools. They're used to structure entire societies, to justify power, and to build empires. Which really leaves us with a final question to think about. If this ancient epic was so expertly crafted to legitimize the rise of Babylon, what are the foundational stories that shape our world today, and who do they serve?
All right, let's go way, way back to ancient Mesopotamia. We're talking about the cradle of civilization, where some of the world's very first stories about power were carved into clay tablets. And believe me, these weren't just simple bedtime stories. They were really complex, sophisticated models for how the entire world worked.
Okay, so let's just dive right into this. We're so used to stories that pit a hero against a villain, light versus darkness. It's a classic setup. But what if the most fundamental power struggle wasn't that at all? What if it was about two totally different but equally necessary kinds of power, just trying to figure out how to coexist?
Well, in the Mesopotamian pantheon, that whole dynamic was brought to life by two divine brothers, Enlil, the god of the storm, and Enki, the god of the deep waters. Think of them as two sides of the same cosmic coin. They're these opposing forces whose constant push and pull shaped not just their mythology, but the very civilization that looked up to them.
So first up, let's talk about Enlil. Honestly, if you could give raw, absolute power a physical form, it would probably look a lot like him. He is all about that external, visible power, the undeniable force of command and being in charge. Enlil's main job title was basically the Decreer of Fates. Why? Because he held the sacred tablets of destiny, which gave him the final say over, well, everything in the cosmos. When Enlil spoke, reality itself had to listen. There was no appealing the decision, no negotiating. What he said went. Period.
I mean, this ancient hymn just nails the kind of sheer awe that Enlil inspired. Just think about that one line. His glance makes the mountains anxious. That's incredible. We're not just talking about a king here. This is a full-on cosmic force, an authority so absolute that the planet itself gets nervous when he looks at it.
And if you look at his resume, it's pretty impressive. He commanded the weather, he was the one who gave mortal kings their legitimacy, he ran the whole assembly of the gods, and yeah, when he felt it was necessary, he could unleash total destruction. Enlil's power was always public, always top-down, and absolutely supreme.
But you know what they say, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. And Enlil's perfect opposite was his brother Enki, who is the master of a completely different and much more subtle kind of power.
Where Enlil was about outer power, Enki was all about the inner game. His nickname was the One Who Knows. His home turf was the Abzu, this mysterious freshwater ocean deep beneath the earth, a place of secrets and creative energy. Enki's power wasn't about shouting commands, it was about understanding, about cleverness, and about finding those ingenious solutions that nobody else could even imagine.
So while Enlil is ruling from his throne way up on high, Enki's influence is kind of bubbling up from below. He's the patron of artists and craftsmen, the master of magic, and, importantly, the quiet protector of humanity. His power is foundational. It works through creating things and knowing things, not through brute force.
And this right here is the absolute core of their relationship. You've got Enlil, who imposes order from the outside like a king giving a decree. And then you have Enki, who cultivates order from the inside like a magician or a master inventor. One is the immovable object, the other is the unstoppable force of sheer intellect.
So what happens when these two kinds of power slam into each other? Well, you don't get a simple winner and a loser. What you get is a divine balancing act. This incredible cosmic negotiation that plays out in some of Mesopotamia's greatest myths.
The best example of this, by far, is the story of the Great Flood. It's a tale we all think we know, right? But in the original Mesopotamian version, it's the perfect case study of this Enlil and Enki dynamic at its most critical, high-stakes moment.
Okay, let's break this down. Enlil, acting like the ultimate cosmic judge, decides that humanity is just too loud and annoying. His solution? It's simple, it's absolute. Wipe them all out with a flood. The other gods are all sworn to secrecy. But Enki, the protector of civilization, finds this brilliant little loophole. He can't break his oath and speak directly to a human, right? So instead, he speaks to the wall of a reed hut, knowing full well that King Ziusudra is sleeping on the other side. It's genius. And the result is a perfect balance. Enlil's decree is fulfilled. The flood does destroy mankind. But Enki's wisdom makes sure that the seed of mankind survives. Authority gets what it wants, but ingenuity saves the day.
So the takeaway here isn't that Enlil was defeated or humiliated. Not at all. Instead, his absolute raw power gets tempered by Enki's wisdom. The result isn't a victory for one god over the other, it's about restoring balance to the entire system. It proves that raw power, on its own, really needs the guidance of insight.
And in this whole dynamic, it wasn't just a one-off story. It's actually a foundational archetype, the king and the magician. It's a power couple that we see echoed in myths and stories for literally thousands of years after.
I mean, the most famous parallel has gotta be King Arthur and his advisor, Merlin. It's almost a perfect match. Arthur is the king, the symbol of order and external authority. That's Enlil. And Merlin is the wise magician, the master of secret knowledge who guides the king from behind the scenes. That's Enki.
But this quote here points to a really critical warning. The king and the magician, they need each other. Authority without wisdom, well, it just becomes tyranny, or even worse, foolishness. The second Merlin leaves the picture, Arthur's whole kingdom starts to fall apart. Power by itself is just not enough. But here's the thing that makes the original Mesopotamian version so fascinating and unique. Unlike Merlin, Enki never leaves. He and Enlil are locked in this permanent, totally necessary state of tension and balance. Theirs isn't just a temporary mentorship that ends, it's an ongoing, eternal partnership. It suggests a model where authority and wisdom have to always exist together, constantly challenging and tempering each other.
And that really just leaves us with a final thought to chew on. In a world that is so often drawn to absolute leaders and decisive top-down commands, what can we learn from this 4,000-year-old story? It seems to suggest that maybe the strongest, most effective kind of leadership isn't a single, all-powerful figure after all, but a balanced partnership between raw authority and deep insight, between the king and the magician.
All right, let's get right into it. If you've spent any time at all looking into ancient mythology online, you've definitely come across these two names, Enki and Enlil. They were two incredibly powerful gods in ancient Mesopotamia, brothers, part of the main divine family. But today, oh man, their stories are causing a whirlwind of confusion, with people connecting them to practically every major religious figure you can think of. So here's a really common one you'll see. The argument goes that because the god Enlil was the one who kicked off the Great Flood in the Sumerian myths, he must be the same character as the God of the Old Testament who also brings a giant world-ending flood. Seems pretty simple, right? A logical connection. But then you click a different link and you see this. The exact same god, Enlil, is also being directly linked to Satan. Wait a minute. So on one hand, he's the god of the Bible, and on the other, he's the ultimate bad guy. How can one ancient god be seen as two figures that are complete polar opposites? And trust me, the confusion does not stop there. Let's bring in his brother Enki. Now, he's usually painted as the more friendly, pro-humanity god, which has led to some really out-there theories, like this one, claiming he was reincarnated as Jesus. So, let's get this straight. We have Enlil as both God and Satan, and now we have his brother Enki as Jesus. It's a mess. This is the real question we need to ask. To even begin to sort through all these modern theories, we have to go back to the source. We've got to look at the original Mesopotamian texts and figure out who these gods were to the people who actually worshipped them. So let's step away from the internet rabbit holes for a minute and properly meet these two, just as the ancient Sumerians and Akkadians saw them. Okay, so on one side you've got Enlil. Think of him as the king of the gods. His domains were the wind, the air, the storm. But most importantly, he was the one with the real political power, the ultimate authority. He was all about maintaining divine order. And on the other side, you have his brother, Enki. He was the god of wisdom, magic, and the sweet waters that flowed deep beneath the earth. He was this master creator, a bit of a clever trickster, and almost always seen as a champion for mankind. And this right here changes everything. Modern takes love to shove them into these simple good versus evil boxes, but that's just not how the ancients thought. Their relationship was so much more interesting. It was a clash between Enlil's rigid, top-down political power and Enki's clever, flexible, creative wisdom. And there is no better story to see these two personalities clash than the most famous myth they both feature in, the Mesopotamian story of the Great Flood. So in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the story goes that humanity has just gotten way too loud, and all their noise is keeping the gods from getting any sleep. So Enlil, as the guy in charge, gets the Council of Gods to agree to just wipe them all out with a massive flood. It's a harsh, final decision, but one god just wasn't on board, and he had to get creative. You see, all the gods had sworn an oath that they wouldn't warn a single human. This is where Enki, the god of wisdom, gets really crafty. He goes down to the hut of a man named Utnapishtim, but instead of talking to him, he talks to the wall of the hut. That way, he technically doesn't break his oath, but he makes sure the guy inside hears every single word. I mean, what a classic Enki move, finding a brilliant loophole in divine law to do what he thinks is right. Enki basically lays out this entire rescue mission. He gives Utnapishtim the specific instructions to build a boat, a list of who and what to bring aboard, and even a cover story to tell his neighbors so they don't get suspicious. It's a complete, perfectly thought-out plan, all coming from the god of wisdom to defy the god of power. And guess what? The plan works perfectly. After the storm finally ends, Utnapishtim starts sending out birds to find land. A dove comes back, a swallow comes back, but then he sends out a raven, and when that raven doesn't return, he knows. He knows it found something to land on. Humanity, all thanks to Enki's clever plan, survived Enlil's rage. Now, if that story sounds incredibly familiar, well, it should. The parallels to the story of Noah are impossible to ignore. But this is where we have to be really careful and draw a line between influence and identity. They are not the same story, but one absolutely helps shape the other. Just look at the timeline. The Mesopotamian flood stories we have were being written down somewhere around 2000 BCE. The biblical flood story that we read in Genesis wasn't put into its final form until way, way later. We're talking over 1,000 years later, probably during the Babylonian exile. This is a perfect example of what scholars call cultural borrowing. And it's not plagiarism. Think of it more like a movie adaptation of a famous book. The basic plot points might be the same, but the director changes the themes, the message, the characters' motivations, all to make it work for a new audience with a different perspective. So when you put them side by side, yeah, a lot of the details look the same. An angry divine power, one chosen hero, a big boat, saving the animals, sending out birds. But the theological heart of the story, it's completely different. The Mesopotamian story is all about a fight between the gods. It's a polytheistic family feud. The biblical version transforms it into a story of a single God's judgment on all of humanity. So the biblical authors took this amazing, dramatic framework and basically swapped out the engine. The conflict isn't between gods anymore, it's between one all-powerful God and a sinful mankind. This is the key. Enlil isn't Yahweh. Enki isn't some secret savior figure. What happened is that their conflict, their different actions and motivations, were sort of collapsed and reinterpreted into the actions of a single, complex, all-powerful God. So, why does any of this matter? Why should we care about a 4,000-year-old rivalry between two Mesopotamian gods? Well, because it tells us so much about how our own foundational stories came to be. So here's the bottom line. Enki and Enlil were complex. They weren't just the good one and the bad one. Their story shows us that myths and ideas are never stuck in one place. They travel, they get shared, they get adapted over centuries. And what often happens is that these nuanced ancient figures get simplified to fit into new ways of thinking. When we understand that original context, it doesn't take anything away from later stories. If anything, it gives us a much richer, deeper history of where our most important stories came from. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a story as huge as the Great Flood has this incredible, layered history, what other stories that we think we know inside and out have a past that we've totally forgotten? Okay, so let's talk about one of the most powerful, complex, and frankly, intimidating deities in all of history. Get this, she's the first goddess we have any written record of, and her story, which is over 5,000 years old, is still absolutely captivating. She was Inanna to the Sumerians, Ishtar to the Akkadians, and at her core is this huge, fascinating mystery that we're going to try and solve together right now. So, what's the big deal? Well, it all boils down to this. How can one single goddess be the patron of tender, passionate love and also of brutal, bloody war? I mean, think about it. Those aren't just slightly different things. They feel like complete opposites. And that contradiction is the very heart of who she is. I mean, how does that even work? On one side, you've got this goddess of beauty, sensuality, and procreation, the one who oversees the sacred marriage that keeps the land fertile and prosperous. But on the other side, her symbol is the lion. She's the goddess of warfare, political power, and a kind of terrifying justice. One side is all about creation, and the other is pure destruction. It just doesn't seem to add up. To get to the bottom of this, we've got to go way, way back, like to the dawn of civilization. Her story begins in ancient Sumer, in cities like Uruk, more than 5 millennia ago. As the Sumerian goddess Inanna, she was already a huge deal. But then, when the Akkadian Empire rose, she merged with their traditions and became Ishtar, and her influence just exploded from there. All right, so how do we really get to know her? Well, the best way is to dive right into the myths. These stories aren't just fairy tales. They're like a window into the ancient Mesopotamian mind, showing us exactly how they thought about the gods, power, and the chaos of the world. You've probably heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? It's one of the oldest stories ever written. Well, she plays a huge, unforgettable role in it. She sees the hero Gilgamesh, decides she wants him, and proposes marriage. But he shuts her down. Hard. He actually lists all of her ex-lovers and the horrible things that happened to them. As you can imagine, she doesn't take it well. She flies into a rage, unleashes this cosmic monster called the Bull of Heaven on his city, and this whole act of revenge ends up causing the death of Gilgamesh's best friend, Enkidu. And Gilgamesh doesn't just say no. He really lays into her with lines like this, basically calling her a black widow whose love is a death sentence. It's an absolutely brutal takedown that really cements her reputation as this dangerous, unpredictable femme fatale. But wait a minute, what if we're looking at this all wrong? What if Gilgamesh was actually the one who messed up? See, some modern analyses point out that as the king of Uruk, which was Inanna's city, it was his sacred duty to be her partner. By rejecting her, and so disrespectfully at that, he was failing his entire kingdom. So maybe her rage wasn't just petty jealousy. Maybe it was a goddess punishing a king who failed his job. And let me tell you, her ambition was off the charts. There's this other amazing myth where she wants to make her city the most powerful in the world. So she goes to visit Enki, the god of wisdom, and challenges him to a drinking game. After she drinks him under the table, she tricks him into giving her the Mies. These are basically the divine blueprints for all of civilization. She grabs them, hops in her boat, and speeds back to her own city, making it the center of the world. Just classic Inanna, cunning, ambitious, and totally unstoppable. Okay, but probably her most famous and most intense myth is her journey down into the underworld. She shows up at the gates of the realm of the dead, ruled by her sister, decked out in all her finest regalia. But to get in, she has to pass through 7 gates. And at every single gate, a piece of her power, her crown, her jewels, her robes, is stripped away from her. By the time she reaches her sister's throne, she is completely naked, vulnerable, and powerless. The judges of the underworld just look at her with the look of death, and she instantly becomes a corpse. They hang her body on a meat hook. It's this incredibly grim, powerful image of a goddess at her absolute lowest. But here's the thing about Inanna. She always has a plan. Before she even started her journey, she told her right-hand man to go get help if she didn't come back. The god Enki eventually helps out, and she's brought back to life. But there's a rule. No one leaves the underworld without a substitute. So when she gets back to the land of the living, she finds her husband Dumuzid. Is he mourning her? Nope. He's sitting on her throne, dressed in fine clothes, having a great time. Inanna takes one look at him, gives him the look of death, and says, "You'll do." Utterly ruthless. So, okay, we've got this goddess of love who sentences her own husband to death. A creator who is also a destroyer? What is going on? Well, the answer isn't really about psychology, it's about history. You see, her identity wasn't static. It was a journey across cultures and centuries. She started as Inanna in Sumer. Then she was syncretized with the Akkadian Ishtar. From there, her worship spread to the Phoenicians, who called her Astarite. And finally, Phoenician sailors brought the worship of Astarite to Greece, where she's slowly transformed into the goddess we now know as Aphrodite. And this right here is the missing piece of the puzzle. The early version of Aphrodite wasn't just about love and beauty. In warrior cultures like Sparta, she was worshipped as Aphrodite Aurea, which literally means Aphrodite the warlike. She still had that fierce, destructive, Ishtar-like side to her. The paradox was still there. But then something happened. As her cult moved into other parts of Greece, particularly Athens, they basically edited her. The theory goes that the Athenians just couldn't square the idea of a beautiful, sexual goddess also being a violent warrior. It didn't fit their categories, so they just dropped the warrior part. And what was left behind is the purely romantic, gentle goddess of love that we think of today. The paradox was finally solved by just cutting her in half. Now, you might be thinking this is all just ancient history, right? But what's so wild is how her complexity speaks to conversations we are having right now, today, about power, identity, and especially gender. I want you to just listen to this quote. It was written by a high priestess named Enki more than 4,000 years ago. In a hymn to Inanna, she says, "The power to turn a man into a woman and a woman into a man belongs to the goddess." I mean, that sounds like something you could read online today, not from one of the oldest texts in human history. And that wasn't just a cool line in a poem, it was real. Her worship was this incredible center for people who didn't fit into neat little boxes. Her priests, known as the Gala, often took on female identities. Other temple workers would dress in the clothing of the opposite gender. For the ancient Mesopotamians, Inanna was the divine patron of anyone who existed outside of or moved between the strict male-female binary. This whole journey from Inanna to Ishtar to Aphrodite, it actually brings up a debate that's still very much alive today, especially in modern pagan circles. It's this idea of hard versus soft polytheism. So, are Ishtar and Aphrodite two totally separate, distinct gods? That's hard polytheism. Or are they just different cultures using different names and stories to describe the same universal divine energy? That's soft polytheism. The story of this one goddess forces us to think about what a god even is. So, at the end of the day, there's a reason we're still talking about her 5,000 years later. She's been reinterpreted now as a feminist icon, a symbol of raw, untamed female power that refuses to be just one thing. She is creative and destructive. She's a lover and a warrior. She represents a kind of wholeness that defies easy labels. Which really leaves us with one final thought, doesn't it? Why are we still so fascinated by gods like her, gods of chaos, of paradox? Maybe it's because deep down we know that life itself isn't neat and tidy. Maybe love and war, creation and destruction aren't actually opposites at all, but just two sides of the same incredibly powerful and very human coin.
All right, let's dive into one of the oldest stories ever told. We're talking about the birth of the world from the body of a monstrous goddess. So what do they have in common? The answer is a terrifying, world-creating dragon. Her story is this incredible archetype that's been retold for literally millennia. Her name is Tiamat, and she is the personification of the primordial sea.
This right here, this comes straight from the opening of the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish. I mean, just listen to that. It sets this truly primordial scene, a time before time itself, when literally nothing existed but this vast, chaotic soup of water.
So picture this. We're talking before the beginning of, well, anything. There's just this formless void and two beings, Apsu, who is the fresh water, and Tiamat, the embodiment of the chaotic saltwater sea. And as the story goes, these new, younger gods, well, they were full of energy. They were loud, they were ambitious, and their constant partying really started to disrupt the primordial calm. This whole racket just drove Apsu, their father, crazy. So much so that he actually plotted to destroy them, which, as you can imagine, set the stage for the very first divine conflict.
Now, this is where Tiamat's story gets really interesting, because we see this dramatic transformation. At first, she actually tries to be the peacemaker. She tries to calm Apsu down and stop the conflict. But everything changes after he's killed by their own descendants.
With her consort gone and pressured by some of the other gods to get revenge, Tiamat's grief just curdles into this all-consuming rage. You see this incredible switch flip. She goes from a creative, motherly force to a raging, monstrous embodiment of chaos, absolutely hell-bent on the total destruction of her children.
So to wage this war, she basically turns her creative power inside out. Instead of creating gods, she starts spawning, well, these things. The epic lists 11 species of monstrous beings, a terrifying army filled with invincible weapons. Then she puts her new consort, Kingu, in charge and sends them all off to destroy the gods.
So, as you can imagine, the younger gods are utterly terrified by Tiamat's monstrous army. I mean, who wouldn't be? None of them dares to face her. That is, until one champion, a young and powerful storm god, steps forward, Marduk.
This battle between Marduk and Tiamat is the absolute center of the whole epic. And it's not just a fight, it's a brutal, winner-take-all showdown for control of the entire universe. Marduk, armed with winds and a bow, uses this really clever trap to overpower Tiamat, ultimately leading to her defeat.
But here's the crazy part. Her body isn't just destroyed, it becomes the raw material for creation itself. Marduk splits her corpse, as the text says, like a flat fish. He forms mountains from her breasts, and from her weeping eyes flow the two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. So paradoxically, her death is the ultimate act of creation.
And that right there beautifully illustrates the next layer of this story. Because this isn't just about how the physical world was made, it's also about how the political world was made.
I mean, you gotta ask, why was this incredibly violent story so important to them? Well, what if this epic battle, the very story of creation itself, was actually a brilliant piece of political propaganda?
So there's actually a name for this kind of story pattern. Scholars call it the Chaoskampf, which is a German word that means chaos battle. And it's a theme you find all over the place in ancient Near Eastern religions. This idea of a hero god stepping up to impose order on some kind of chaotic, usually monstrous force.
So here's the bottom line. The myth isn't just explaining where the sky came from. It's actually legitimizing a political reality on the ground. By defeating chaos, by defeating Tiamat, Marduk earns the right to rule over all the other gods. And that, by extension, elevates his home city, Babylon, to the supreme center of the cosmos.
And this whole framework, The hero god defeating the chaos monster, it turns out to be an incredibly potent and adaptable storytelling tool. You see different cultures using this exact same pattern to explain and justify their own unique political and religious structures.
This academic analysis here, it just nails how this motif works. It's not some rigid formula. It's more like a fluid template that storytellers can shape to fit whatever message they need to send. But you are never going to guess where this particular quote comes from.
That's right, My Little Pony. The exact same story structure that was used to justify the divine kingship of Marduk in ancient Babylon is also used in a children's cartoon to explore themes of chaos, order, and the power of friendship. It just goes to show you how deeply embedded and versatile this ancient story really is.
Okay, so let's keep going, because Tiamat's shadow as this primordial chaos dragon, well, it stretches way, way beyond ancient Babylon.
You see this template of a hero god battling a sea monster pop up again and again. In Canaanite myths, for example, the storm god Baal defeats the sea god Yam. And you can find really clear echoes of this in the Hebrew Bible, in descriptions of Yahweh's victory over the chaotic sea serpent, Leviathan.
And the core elements are just unmistakable across all these different cultures. We see it in Greek myths with Typhon, the father of all monsters. We see it in Norse mythology with Thor's famous battle against Jormungandr, the world serpent, and in Hittite lore with the storm god Teshub slaying the dragon Ilyanka.
The incredible power of this story means her legacy is still unfolding, reborn in, of all places, the world of modern pop culture.
And that brings us right back to where we started. The primordial chaos dragon Tiamat is the common thread connecting a 3,000-year-old myth, the Bible, and one of the most famous fantasy games in the world. She is the mother of all monsters, both literally and mythologically.
So it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? This battle between order and chaos is a story we seem absolutely compelled to tell over and over again. Is the monster ever truly defeated, or does it just change its name for the next generation's story? What forms will this ancient struggle take next?